Don't be confused by the image you see on the screen. We're gonna get back to it in a minute. But today I want to talk to you about something really important and something very, very difficult in art. And that's negative space. And without understanding negative space, you cannot be a good artist. And I want to give you a different angle on negative space, which comes from my understanding on negative space. And I learned about negative space through close to 16 years of studying Chinese and Japanese calligraphy. I've reached the master level in Japan under a grandmaster here who is really well known. He's actually a disciple of a guy who is teaching the emperor, so there you go. I was extremely lucky to meet this guy. I was extremely lucky that he accepted me as his pupil, and he taught me for nearly 16 years. And negative space is something that is exceptionally important, but it's also very difficult to understand and comprehend and implement because it's very intuitive. And it requires really quite a lot of studies and time invested into understanding it and also applying it into your work. Now let me tell you how this works in Japanese calligraphy or Chinese calligraphy. What you see on the screen is an autobiography by Huai Su, which was just an insane calligrapher. His specialty was cursive script, which is what you see in here, and his ability to deliver the power and the balance and the harmony through brush is just unmatched to anyone else. I mean, it's just mind-blowing to me. And I remember, once I was standing in Ginza in Tokyo during calligraphy exhibition, and I was looking at one of the works of one of the exhibitors over there with my teacher, and we were talking about power of line, and I really liked the work we were looking at, and we were talking about it, and he said that when you're looking at work, when you're looking at calligraphy, and when you're looking at someone's writing, you need to do something that's counterintuitive. You need to look at the negative space. You need to look at the kuhak, which is basically the white void, or ma. There are different words for it, as for everything in Chinese or Japanese. It's a very poetic language, thanks to kanji or hanzi, right? But the point was that instead of looking at characters, you should be looking at negative space. Negative space will tell you everything you need to know about how powerful, how well balanced this work is. Now let me tell you about the difficulty of creating balance and harmony in Japanese or Chinese calligraphy. When you write calligraphy, you write with 1/3 of the tip of the brush. So you have the bristle and you write with 1/3. Your hand is lifted in the air, doesn't rest. You have to have a very stable hand, very well trained. And you just keep writing for hours and hours and years and decades, and you just, keep studying. But the difficulty is not in that. The difficulty is in the fact that if you hesitate just for one moment, if you have a moment of indecision, it's going to be immediately visible because the ink's going to start spilling on the paper. You need to deliver the composition. You need to deliver the balance. You need to deliver the power, the rhythm before you start writing. It needs to be in your soul. That's why they say that shuji, which is basically learning how to write characters, kind of like a calligraphy in Western understanding, is written by the brush, where the calligraphy itself, which is shodo or shufa in Chinese, right, is written by the heart. Because you don't think about it, you just act, right? You just let it go. But in order to let it go, you need to be fucking good, okay? Which is exactly what this guy was. But my point is that you can't hesitate. So unlike in any Western art, when you can repaint something, when you can fix something, when you can notch something, when you can, remove something, scribble it and redo it, you fucking can't do it in Chinese or Japanese calligraphy. It's just not possible. You have to start from scratch. So imagine if you're writing something that has, 230, 400 characters, and you make a mistake because you lost concentration and you just got distracted. You have to start from scratch. That's a whole different level of respect for the art. This is why it takes decades, This is why my teacher at the age of 74 said that he starts to understand calligraphy after 60 years of studying it. Just saying. So anyway, what I want to talk to you about is negative space. Now, in Eastern art, especially in calligraphy, but also in Japanese aesthetics, which is why they're so beautiful, negative space is an essential part of the image, essential part of whatever you're looking at. The space in between the main subject, which in this case is characters, is like a yang. So the yin and yang, right? The characters are the yin, the space is the yang. So you got a constant sort of a conversation between these two. And in fact, in order to determine the power and the balance of a composition, you look at the negative space, not at the characters. Even in Western arts, you know, sometimes teachers tell pupils to paint a negative space around the object to understand the balance, right? And this is exactly what it is. So let's talk about negative space on this example, and I'm gonna explain to you how to, you know, understand composition a bit better when you're gonna be focusing on negative space, not just on the elements in your image, right? So obviously the main feature here, or the main subject, is gonna be the vessel, right? Now, what I'm doing here with this vessel is that I'm shooting it from a low perspective, and I'm shooting it with a longer lens. I really like shooting like this, and this is coming probably from my photography years. I was working close to a decade as a professional portrait photographer, and I always like to go intimate with my lens. You know, long lens, quite a deep focus, and nice separation with depth of field. So, you know, kind of wide aperture, because it creates this kind of an isolation and sort of this kind of an intimacy. Even street photography, I like to do it this way because I think it's just more intimate and more, it's more powerful storytelling for me. But that's personal. But I'm trying to go to the level of the vessel more or less and shoot from this perspective. Now, if you look at the wings, right, they create this kind of like an X pattern, and the wing here is closer to the camera. It's going to be slightly cut on the top, but I'm not actually cutting this open boolean feature. I'm cutting just the corner, and you can actually see the corner here, so you're not really losing any valuable detail. But by cutting this corner of the wing, I'm framing it tighter, therefore getting closer to this vessel, and it's sort of like an optical illusion that re-emphasizes the closeness to it, right? And because the wing that's closer to the camera is taller visually than the one that's further away, which creates this kind of like a three-dimensionality to the image, okay? Now, this vessel is outweighed or balanced by this guy. And the reason why this guy is so small is, one, because it's in scale, and two, when you add a human silhouette, especially when it's contrasty, so it's a dark silhouette on a bright background, it's going to immediately pop, because we as humans always gonna look for humans, right, in the image, for faces, humans, and also text, which is why this is anchored to the top, and it creates a triangle between these elements, closing the composition, right? In addition, you got the wing that's actually pointing towards the text, right? And this wing is pointing outside the image, which sort of makes you circle in the image as a whole. Lastly, you got this text here in the bottom, which anchors the bottom right corner, so it makes you to stretch all the way down here. And since eyes are entering the image from the left-hand side, doesn't matter if you're Chinese or English, you're always going to enter from the left hand side. You go from here, you jump down, go here, slide through the text, go down, back, and you circle like a shit in the ice cream. Do you know what I mean? You're locked in the image. That's the whole point. The longer you have someone locked in the image, the better. The better your image is going to be in their head. Now, there's a circle around it, right? Which not only defines and re-emphasizes the area in which I want you to look, but also softens the whole image and echoes the gentle, these curves of the vessel, and also the curve on the logo, okay? So these lines are sort of flowing all together. Now let's talk about negative space, because that's what we're here for, right? There's a lot of negative space in this image. In fact, I love negative space in my images, okay? I love it because I think that, like in the title of this video, calmness comes from confidence. So you need to be confident about creating these calm spaces, these empty spaces, because they're gonna empower the whole image, right? If someone doesn't talk, let's say you're in a conversation and someone doesn't talk all the time, they just say when they have to say something, and then when they say there's a weight to it, you will respect them more. There's going to be more charisma in what they say, more weight to whatever they say. Why? Because they just don't blubber, right? They just say when they really want to say something, and when they fucking say it, they mean it. The same thing you need to do with negative space. And you need to make a statement. This is what I'm doing with a lot of my work. That's why my work has a lot of negative space, because I fucking love it, right? I think it's extremely powerful. And that's what coming from the you know, me studying calligraphy for well over a decade. So now negative space is going to be not just everything around the main subjects, which is going to be the vessel, the text, and the human, right? But also it's gonna be on the vessel itself, because if you look at the vessel itself, and I'm gonna switch the color here to something different, right? So we're gonna have a lot of negative space here as well. I'm gonna make it smaller, right? All this is gonna be negative space. So you got this beautiful kind of you know, beautiful empty spaces linking areas of detail that are also very delicate, right? Now, if you turn this off and you actually focus on the shape of the negative space, you'll see that, you know, we have this really interesting cutout here, right? That creates an interesting dynamic and sort of, you know, game of shapes that define this vessel, okay? See what I mean? So that's what I'm after. So I'm actually creating details with negative space. That's the idea, okay? I want you to focus on this as a detail. If I overload it with bullshit and text, you will just lose this. But this, you know, shift in angle and the planar shift over there, it's actually a detail, okay? Which is important. These are also details, right? Because you got negative space here inside, and you got a negative space here outside, right? Which defines the tip of this wing. So that's how my brain thinks when I'm designing. Now, when you compose a render, right? Now, when I compose a render, I never look at the models. I always look at the balance between the elements, and I always look at what the negative space tells me. If, for example, we didn't have this text in here, right? So I'm gonna remove it, so you can see the difference, right? If I didn't have it in here, okay? This image would be kind of, for me, like a bald head. It's just something's missing, right? It's very much corner heavy here, right? This space is kind of redundant because it doesn't define anything. Do you see what I mean? Like, this space is very much used and essential because it defines the shape of the vessel. This one defines fuck all. So we need something in here to not just off-balance the image, but to anchor your eyes to go in a triangle to lock you, like I said, like a piece of turd in an ice crack, so you can't escape. You non-stop just circling endlessly in the image. That's the point. Now, in addition to this, right, if you look here, we have lights. But these lights are not very strong. Why? Because if these lights were strong, and were really, really strong, I mean like proper strong, and actually, for example, saturated, which is something I see a lot in people's work, right? They create these massive, you know, emissive effects. So let's say we're gonna saturate the shit out of them, right? And I'm gonna change here a layer to, let's say, linear light to make it really strong, okay? Do you see what happens now? All my attention goes here because that's the only saturated, bright, you know, really colorful element in my image, and it's probably going to be bright. If I'm going to amplify this even more, it's going to be brighter than anything else in the image, or more saturated than anything in the image, and it's going to completely ruin the composition. So when you place small details, lights, decals, etc., you need to think how this is going to play with all the elements in your image. It needs to be harmony. When you make a dish and you cook, you cannot over salt it. You cannot you cannot put too much sugar. You cannot put too much salt, too much lemon or whatever you're doing, because you need to create a balance. The reason why you want to eat ice cream after the dinner is because it balances the saltiness of the steak. So the same with composition. You need to bring a balance. It's constant balancing of elements and shapes. That's what negative space is for. And when you start looking at negative space around the image, you will gain a very different perspective of what is balanced and what is unbalanced. Okay, let's talk about this image for a while, and this one is also interesting. So let me just tell you what was my reasoning here for the composition, right? First of all, we have two mechs, and both of them are cropped. This one is cropped here on the top, and this one is cropped here on the left. Again, I can do that because you can clearly see the design language. You can translate it to this mech. So you're going to be looking here for the element that's missing here and bringing it back here to this corner. And your eye is going to be focusing here, then going back on the leg, traveling here down through the mech and back, and you're going to be circling again. Now humans, like I said, are very powerful, which is why I had to add two of them, because if I only had one of them, if this guy, for example, wasn't here, so I'm going to remove him, it's going to be again, unbalanced. You're going to be basically looking at something that's very much left heavy, as I call it, right? There's just something missing here. So I had to have this human to balance this guy in here. If this guy was missing, it wouldn't be a disaster, okay, it would be fine. But I think with this guy in here, this composition looks a bit more interesting, because we have something that links these two mechs together, okay, and also adds a bit more storytelling to this whole image, because these guys are working and testing these robots, which just came out of the fucking factory, line, right? Now the text on the bottom links and kind of guide your eyes, because again we're gonna be reading the text. We're gonna be reading it from here to the right. So we're gonna be going from left to right, and we will be willing to go this way from left to right here. And again we're gonna go up here through the mech to the left, down, and again, right? So you're gonna be going around the image. And this text basically connects these guys and frames this mech in here, okay? Now, if you look at the negative space in this case, it's really interesting, because the mechs are very complex, right? I mean, they have a complex form and a lot of planar shifts and elements and stuff. So the negative space is very clean, it's white, because I want you to really very clearly see the design language. In addition, there are no many colors, because the mechs themselves have a lot of detail. In fact, I don't really like colorful stuff. I prefer grayscale, because I think it's beautiful. This is why I really like black and white photography, but because then you're focusing on shapes and lighting and change of values instead of focusing on colors, right? So it's a bit of a more kind of like a mature way of appreciating composition, when you don't have colors and you just look. In fact, when I was teaching photography, I oftentimes ask my students to shoot black and white, and then try to shoot in color, because when you're shooting in black and white and look at the image, you can focus on different things. You're focusing instead of colors, you're focusing on changes in value, and then you can easily determine where are the all the visual anchors, which are heavy elements of composition that pull your eyes, right, located. So in this case, we have a lot of detail. There's quite a lot of intricate detail. Reflections create details too, because you got highlights and shadows. They're gonna create a lot of reflections. They're gonna create a lot of depth and contrast is what's gonna pull your attention. One of the visual anchors is contrast. You got contrast, color, sharpness, faces, all kinds of stuff, right? These are all visual pulls or visual anchors. So the negative space here is meant to cut out and sort of define the design language of these complex silhouettes of these mechs with all these cuts, and again a lot of contrast and elements coming from contrast and reflections of light. So if you edit, for example, very complicated background, the negative space would be tainted, would be dirty, right? Would be very difficult to read. This one is very easy to read, which is why the background, you know, is white and clean, right? So that's you know, that's how this was designed. And I'm gonna show you one more image. We're just gonna choose this one, which is from the upcoming course. It's a gun course for plasticity, a sniper rifle concept. Let's talk about this one. This is a really fantastic example of, you know, my brain working on the Eastern definition of negative space. We have 3 elements in here playing together. Okay, we get these beautiful highlights. These are highlights created by the sharp angle of light falling on the gun and reflecting back to the camera, and you can manipulate with this by changing angle of light or changing the camera or changing the angle of you know, of the model itself. And if you want to go deeper into the subject of, you know, composition and negative space visual anchors, just get our course, The Rendering University, by the way. Link in the video description. This one is fantastic. I'm packing 25 years of my experience as a visual artist to this course, and you know, I don't fuck around in this course. This is proper deep knowledge on camera angles, lighting, and my experience over there comes from, you know, calligraphy, photography, and 3D. Okay, so 3 different disciplines, and I really love lighting. I love working with, you know, with composition. This is something that I truly enjoy doing. So this course will teach you not just all the theory on lighting, camera, etc., but also how to composite in Blender, how to put images together, and you know, what's considered a good image and what's considered a weak image, etc. So, you know, get the course, is fantastic. But then going back here, so we have 3 elements, right? We get these beautiful reflective spaces, okay? And we got this nice matte kind of a contrast on this guy, or half matte, right? And since the angle of the light is very steep and kind of bounces back into the camera, the reflections are very strong. They're very controlled. If I showed you the original image, would be very different. In fact, if you get the course, that's the image I'm editing in the course. So you're gonna learn how to edit images properly as well, with the understanding of negative space and composition, and what you need to pay attention to in order to flesh out really powerful portfolio pieces that gonna attract attention on your portfolio. And going forward, we have the text in the bottom, which is faint. It's not too aggressive. I see this a lot in renders where people, you know, put text and it's so aggressive, so overpowering that you just think that this is the main feature. No, the main feature is the gun. This is just a support. It's supposed to be an offset, visual anchor offset to the gun. It's supposed to be framing of the gun. The same with this one. These 2 are filling the gaps, okay? They are basically there to make the negative space around the gun don't feel too void, but feel essential, right? And sort of amplify the design of the gun. So now the empty space around the gun is really, really calm. It's also a pattern. It's one of the mattes from our add-on. So it's very calm and organized, and the gun actually itself is very angular and dynamic, right? So it's really easy to read that negative space around the gun, really easy to read the design language of the gun. And then you also have quite interesting negative spaces on the gun itself, which are kind of binding or connecting the planar shifts between all these angles. Because you got planar shift in here, right? Between these 2 surfaces here, then you got this beautiful, you know, kind of a cutout going in. You got planar shifts here, you know, here, right here. So change in a kind of a shift in the planar orientation of a geometry, which basically gonna catch light differently, right? So if you have a planar shift here on this line right here, is going to be reflective here and dark here. Do you see what I mean? So planar shifts, what they do, they add additional detail by adding reflections or shadows or, you know, highlights, right? So this is kind of like creating detail without adding detail. And this is why I say that, you know, blockouts are very important to understand and actually master, because when you master blockouts, then you know, you can actually deliver a lot of details without really placing any details, because when you know how to deliver these planar shifts, then you're gonna be able to, you know, place detail to empower them and sort of fill in the missing gaps, but they will not be overpowering your design and they will not be cluttering your design. It's gonna be looking clean. And you can add a lot of detail if you want to, but you need to know how to do this, right? I'm an advocate of subtle detail. I like clean forms because to me they're more powerful, they're more elegant, and they're more calm. And that's how I like to design. But you know, a design can be very detailed, but you always need to follow the principles of, you know, visual anchors, negative space, and principles of design, okay? So anyway, again, here you got 3 elements in the image that are main elements, which are gonna be these, and they're gonna be linking, you know, this whole image in a triangle. You could also kind of debate that this is gonna be another anchor, gonna be creating another triangle. So you got 2 triangles in here, which are quite powerful. Now, the last thing I want to talk about here is the angle, okay? So you got these 2 texts that are horizontal that introduce calmness. Horizontal lines always introduce calmness, vertical lines introduce stability, diagonal lines introduce dynamic, you know, kind of a feel. Now this gun has a lot of cuts and, you know, angled cuts and you know, it's kind of, you know, chamfers and all that. So the way I place the gun, instead of placing it, you know, flat horizontally, I sort of tilted it in a bit, you know, in terms of an angle, to emphasize not just the angles on the gun itself, but also to sort of make you focus on it immediately, because it breaks the pattern, right? So you're focusing on the gun first, and then you look at the text. So the text is being subdued by 2 things. One, the gun being angular, and also the text not being fully, you know, opaque. It's basically the opacity is kind of dropped on it. So, you know, you can't really see it fully, and it's not at full power, it's just kind of faint, right? So it's kind of in the background, you know what I mean? So I want you to look mainly at the gun, and then you're gonna be focusing on following all these beautiful planar, you know, shifts and reflections here, right? So that's the idea behind this this render. Now, why do you wanna have negative space speaking for your image in your art? If you're a good artist and you understand how design works, you're not afraid of negative space, and you let the negative space speak for you, because it's going to empower your image, okay? It's going to add a lot of power and strength to your design, instead of making it look, you know, kind of boring and unappealing. Even something very, very simple can look very powerful. And if you look at Asian art, especially in Japan, and you look at all these Zen, you know, like Zen gardens, or like, you know, the interiors in Japan, they extremely beautiful, but they're very simple. And there is a beauty in simplicity, but you need to know how to do it. And in order to know how to do it, you need to master negative space, because without negative space, it all falls apart. So negative space can speak for you, can empower your image, and can make it really, really strong, but you need to know how to use it and how to operate with it, okay? And negative space also can introduce a fantastic rhythm to your design, just like you've seen in calligraphy, right? You can introduce a rhythm to your design, and you can actually connect different elements of your design or of your render together by, you know, by negative space and by sort of manipulating with it. So again, when you're gonna be rendering something next time, don't focus on your model. Focus on how your image looks with your model in it. Focus on the entire frame, right? This is, for example, is so important when, again, when I was teaching photography, when someone was shooting an image, I always told them not to close the other eye, okay? When they look through the visor, right? I want them to see the whole thing, because maybe you're missing something. You can adjust your camera a little bit to encompass something that's outside of your view, okay? You need to make sense out of chaos. When you're looking for, this is why, you know, learning how to compose, one of the best way of learning how to compose an image is street photography. Because when you're shooting street photography, you have chaos, and you have to make sense out of chaos. You have to start seeing pictures in the fucking mess. And that's going to train your brain to see frames. And when you start connecting dots and seeing, you know, what works with what, it's like wearing clothes that don't fit together or fit together very well, right? You need practice to understand how it works and what works with this and what doesn't work with that. Do you know what I mean? So the same with imagery. So when you are, for example, framing in Blender, I never use the passpart tool, which is basically the black bars around the camera. I want to see the whole thing, because I'm just looking at the whole space, and I'm balancing and designing with a negative space. Okay, it comes with time. You need a lot of time to learn this. You need a lot of time to feel this, because you can't really learn this. You need to feel this. Eventually, you're gonna feel it. You're gonna see that. It's like, you know, Neo in Matrix seeing the fucking numbers. It's literally the same principle, right? You see that. I look at an image, and in a split second, I can tell you what's wrong with it on an intuitive level. It just kind of feels like something was poking me, right? That's how it feels. It's just kind of like someone says etc. instead of etc. It just pisses me the fuck off. Do you know what I mean? So it's the same kind of a thing. It's just you can feel it physically. It just bothers you, okay, when the negative space is off. And once you have it on intuitive level, you're gonna be fucking devastatingly good in terms of composition, because you know you're gonna feel it. But in order to feel it, you need to study this. And I encourage you to study really good, you know, examples of art, classical art, you know, really good artists with very, you know, strong pedigree and strong, you know, track record. If you want to do it with 3D artists, great, but make sure you're going to be studying the good ones. Not just what is looking cool to you, what's objectively good, okay? That's really important. People who actually studied art, people who actually know what the fuck they're talking about, okay? Not just some random nonsense that, oh, I think this is cool. Your brain could be deceived. And the reason why it's deceived is because we have so much shit on the internet that when your brain is, you know, looking at all this nonsense on the internet, and you keep looking at these bad images, your brain starts understanding or defining it as norm. It's really dangerous. It's like listening to shit music in an elevator, you don't like it, but you're listening to it so many fucking times. You know, this is how they push the pop hits, right? So you got some song on radio, play it all the fucking time. First time you hear it, you don't like it. Second time, you're like, this shit again. When you hear it for the 25th time, you start fucking humming it, because your brain thinks it's the new norm. It's scary, but it's how it works. That's how they sell fucking songs. When you listen to an album, like, I don't know if you do that, but, you know, back in the day when you have a CD or like a vinyl, right? You had to listen to the whole thing, or you were listening to the whole thing. And there were songs you liked a lot, and there were songs you like, whatever, right? After listening to this fucking record for 30 times, you start liking them, or at least tolerating them, right? That's how brain works. So when you're gonna be looking at bad art, you're gonna be a shit artist. So don't look at bad art, okay? When you, for example, gather references, gather good ones. This is why, you know, when I look for sci-fi references, I'm looking into games like Star Citizen, Mass Effect, Alien Isolation, these kind of games, because I know they have an amazing art. People who hired and worked there are an amazing artist. Doesn't matter what's the story of the game. Doesn't matter whether the game is good or not. I don't give a shit. I'm there for screenshots, right? I played, you know, Mass Effect Andromeda, which was fucking woke as fuck, right? But the game had good art, so I actually finished the whole game and screenshot the shit out of this. Why? Because they have good design. And when you're gonna surround yourself with this kind of stuff, you know, and immerse yourself in good art, gradually gonna become better and better, okay? Alright, well, that's it for the video. Thanks for watching. And one more time, if you're serious about rendering and improving the visual game of your 3D, so, you know, the rendering part, even the design part, then look into our course, Rendering University, because that shit is fucking good, okay? The link is in the video description. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.